It's Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a friend to nominate a Doctor Who story. They choose their favourite things about it, and then without knowing, I have to guess what those favourite things might be.
Hi Toby. As you can see, I'm wearing my finest Toby Hadoke tribute outfit today. My name's Matt Hayden. I train people in conflict management, teamwork, communication skills, cultural diversity, things like that. And all of these fascinating topics, I think, are examined in immense detail in my choice of story, which comes from 1985 when I was a fresh-faced 19-year-old. It's The Two Doctors, and I'll be fascinated to see what you think of it.
Well, welcome everybody. I have spent the day doing Doctor Who commentaries, but not for Happy Times and Places. This is for some BBC releases called Miserable Times. No, I've been commentating with people from the show for, if you're a patron listening to this, for something that is yet to be announced. If you're a non-patron, it's probably been out for years and has probably been discontinued because it is on an archaic medium. That's the difference between how far ahead the patrons are from you listening on iTunes or Podbean or one of those. So is that a little bit of a plug? Say if you want to get things earlier, subscribe to my Patreon feed. If not, welcome from the past, where we still have prawns and we still have COVID, and civilization as we know it still persists. So you've heard from my friend Matt, who is not a Doctor Who fan, but he knows, he's a film buff and he knows enough about Doctor Who. But Matt is the sort of person I like because even though he's not a Doctor Who fan, he could probably he could tell you all of the Doctors. I mean, he could identify Bernard Archer at 10 paces, I should think, and yet he's not a Doctor Who fan. And I know some Doctor Who fans who couldn't identify Bernard Archer at 10 paces. Bregan in Power of the Daleks, Marcus Scarman in Pyramids of Mars. But Matt knows his stuff, but because he's not a fan, although he is, he's aware of it, and he's a geeky enough guy that if he's got a passing interest in a subject, he'll know quite a lot more about it than most people. So I think he's a really interesting proposition, and he's also a good friend of mine, and I'm very fond of him, so I wanted him to take part. And he's one of the few people thus far that has chosen a Colin Baker. I say that. I've had a few more people have chosen Colin Bakers, but haven't actually recorded their things yet. So this is only my second Colin Baker, who was, a doctor I saw when he went out. And this was one of the stories I saw when it went out. So this is exciting for me. And I know it's a story that divides people. But let us now embark. So I hope you've got you can hear my DVD menu in the background, I should think. And I do like that music. I'm on Play All, which I'm going to select in 3, 2, 1, now. Oh, and it has moved, so it's going to go. Ba-boom! Right. The first I heard of The Two Doctors, I wasn't a subscriber to Doctor Who magazine. I couldn't afford it, so I wasn't fully up to speed, but I did. I was on holiday, I think, or I'd got some pocket money, and we went past a shop in a town, because I didn't even live in a town, so there had to be a confluence of things that enabled me to get my mitts on Doctor Who magazine. It wasn't that it was in the local newsagent. There wasn't such a thing, and I would stare longingly at it and not been able to buy it. So anyway, got my hands on Doctor Who magazine. Oh, and this starts in black and white. I think that's a lovely, lovely touch. And I was very excited by this because, and I was never sure. I think part of me initially hoped that was a clip from an old Doctor Who, and it was cleverly cut in with a new Doctor Who, because just the idea that a fragment of an old Doctor Who story might be in modern Doctor Who was enough to convey greatness upon it, because anything old was good. That seems odd, or that seems odd now, especially as somebody getting old. But well, I will come on to this. It's an important part of my digestion of the two Doctors, and I think it's an important part of the makeup of a Doctor Who fan, or this particular one. But the first I heard of the two Doctors was I bought Doctor Who magazine, and it had got the, the stories coming up are. And it said, and it mentioned the two Doctors as one of them. I don't know if it mentioned all of the stories, or whether they let them out piecemeal, but it mentioned that the two Doctors was going to be 3 episodes, and the rest of the stories it mentioned were, of course, it said, 2-parters. And I was like, what? Because obviously I'd missed the edition of Doctor Who magazine that told you that Doctor Who for this season was going to be, 45-minute installments rather than 25. So the idea that everything was, of course, a 2-parter was yet another thing where modern Who was terrible because it wasn't like old Who. Because 2-parters always seemed a bit apologetic, like Black Orchid and the King's Demons and The Awakening. I like The Awakening, but they never seemed like full stories. So the idea that a story might be 50 minutes long, I mean, who would think you could have enough story in something 50 minutes long? Seemed an appalling idea. But then, of course, I was mollified later when it became apparent that the episodes were actually longer than episodes we were used to. But I remember saying to my brother, "Oh, and they're going to do one called The Two Doctors," and him going, "Oh, isn't that idea getting a bit thin now?" Because they'd recently done the 5 Doctors, and we, of course, were aware of the 3 Doctors, and it had been repeated as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. And I thought he'd be excited because, again, it's Patrick Troughton, so it's old Doctor Who. But he said, he went, "Oh, isn't that getting a bit over familiar, that idea now?" It's like, oh, because I was seeking approval. But sorry, I know some people don't like me drinking, so I won't drink. I just got a bit of a dry throat. I've stopped eating in these things, which is appropriate for a story that turns the stomach. Here is Shockeye o' the Quonsing Grig, played by the glorious John Stratton, who I suspect some people still might not have put 2 and 2 together. And I was terribly shocked when I saw a piece of work I'm now hugely familiar with, Quatermass and the Pit. And I think I'd read that John Stratton was in it, and as I was watching it, because it was all edited together when I first saw it on a BBC video, I was trying to work out who John Stratton could have been, because it was ancient and black and white. I reckoned he could have been anybody, and of course he didn't have Rice Krispies on his face. But I was shocked to discover he was the heroic army captain, Captain Potter, who's the sort of romantic lead, and is rather good looking in it. I think he went to seed quite quickly, Stratton, because by the time he's rather beautiful in The Cruel Sea, a movie that he's in the late 50s as well. He has quite a big part in, alongside some cinema greats. But by the time he's in The Newcomers, a decade later, his sort of hair is thinned out. And I say that as somebody whose own hair is thinned out, and he'd got a bit rotund, and I think he was quite a sort of pallid. I know people who worked with him who described him as a very sweaty actor. I can imagine him having quite a clammy handshake, and I think he had sort of quite pallid, damp skin, and I think he had a nervous reaction to performing, which meant that he got his shirt soaked through very, very quickly, and I think he had to change his shirt. So. Yes, he was. That's my John Stratton anecdote. He was quite a sweaty man. But sadly, I was looking him up recently. His death, because he was quite a respected member of the acting profession. His death was not reported in any newspaper, nor even the stage newspaper for actors. And he was only 65 when he died, and he'd had a good career, which had petered out into being a character actor, but he gets top billing here. He's seen as the star amongst, such recognisable faces as Jacqueline Pearce and Lawrence Payne, who had been a sort of a film star. Anyway, I think John Stratton is glorious as Shockeye o' the Quonsing Grig. He's the sort of character you can sort of only get away with in Doctor Who. And here is Jacqueline Pearce. As I never had the pleasure with John Stratton. I wrote to him. I never heard back, but I wrote to him, Kerry's his agent, and I wonder now if I'd been better off going via Equity, who used to forward letters to people's homes' addresses in those days, until autograph hunters made them think better of it, and now genuine researchers can't get through to actors directly. Well, it depends. It depends what mood Equity are in, but it certainly made things more difficult. Anyway, Lawrence Payne here, who had retired pretty much from acting at this point, and Peter Moffat had said, "Oh, come out of retirement to do it." Lawrence Payne, of course, had been Johnny Ringo in The Gunfighters, which was a part that Patrick Troughton was considered for, funnily enough. And Lawrence Payne was also Morix in episode 1 of The Leisure Hive, reuniting him with his Vampire Circus co-star Adrienne Corrie. The fascinating thing about Lawrence Payne is that I'm sure there's a trivia question that what links Dastari, Baigan from Four to Doomsday, and I've just got to see if there's one other. Kevin Stoney, Mavic Chen. They all have. I think Kevin Stoney only had one eye, but I'm happy to stand corrected in that. I don't know if he lost it. Anat from Day of the Daleks. So there's certainly you can, if I do some proper research, this has only just occurred to me. Lawrence, what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that Lawrence Payne, who played Dastari, only has one eye because the actor Basil Henson and he were having a sword fight in an episode of Sexton Blake, and there was an accident, and it caused Payne to lose one eye. But what I think of Lawrence Payne in this, who I think is an actor of great dignity, and he's got that really slightly pinched accent that he has. He was from London, but he's got that sort of slightly pinched diction that he has that makes him noticeable even if you're not looking. I think you can always tell when it's Lawrence Payne talking. He reminds me here of something that was an image emblazoned in my mind from my youth, as the bloke from the video of Video Killed the Radio Star, the bloke from the Buggles, because he had quite funky glasses. And I'm sure I read an interview with Lawrence Payne where he said that those glasses were prescription glasses for him that cost about £300, whereas he'd got his own glasses that would have been perfectly done the job. And that £300 could have been sent on, say, a better set here or a better Sontarmas or something. I like these scenes between Dastari and the Doctor. I think Lawrence Payne has great dignity and he and great sort of that controlled passion that he has. I like his lines about saying our seed is thin. That is a very nice Robert Holmes in piece of dialogue. And I love this bit, Nicholas Fawcett as the technician, who is also now there's an actor called Nick Fawcett on IMDb also listed as not being Nicholas Fawcett. They separate them. They're the same guy, and he's still going today. And I feel sorry for him because looking at this, when he said operate the defence, I thought that was the close-up. Like when he actually only says one line when you can see his face, and the rest of him is sort of off screen because it's the Sontaran ships. But I love that it's done with such economy. They're showing how the space station is getting invaded, and what it is it's a guy playing a small part, noticing the thing, getting killed, blah, blah, blah. He does the job very nicely, and he's still acting today, Nick Fawcett, and he is Nicholas Fawcett and Nick Fawcett are the same person that IMDb does not realise. And that was the first time, and I'd loved the Sontarans since the Doctor Who magazine archive of the Time Warrior, which had some great pictures in it, and I love the image of Lynx, and there's a picture with that made me fall in love with Elizabeth Sladen, and I've always had a soft spot for the Time Warrior, and I'd never seen the Sontarans in action. And that Doctor Who magazine that talked about the two Doctors hadn't said the Sontarans were back, and I think a future issue that I didn't get must have done. So the first I knew of the Sontarans coming back was that scene with the technician and seeing the Sontaran spaceships. So I was cock-a-hoop and in seventh heaven at the anticipation now of seeing Sontarans, one of the great monsters of Doctor Who that I'd not seen. And I was also predisposed to like this because Patrick Troughton was by now, I think, my favourite Doctor, because I'd loved him in The Five Doctors, and because he was from the olden days. And I love the way that Colin Baker does this food stuff. The way he describes cooking the Gumball Jacks in their own juices is a beautiful piece of foodie acting. And it's clever because you're talking about because food is good if something is steeped in its own juices. It's a good way of flavouring something and using the most of the beast if you were. But it's also pretty grim if you boil it down to what it's sort of talking about. So I think that's very clever. It has that clever duality of what consuming a living creature is. I, for the record, am a non-meat eater, but I do eat fish. I wanted to give up fish when I was younger, and my mum wouldn't let me because I had to get some protein, and she was doing the cooking, and she was... Colin Baker, I think, does the fish holding acting extremely well there. I think you buy that is an actual moving fish. I even think you could sort of see it moving, but it's not. But I think he sells the illusion of that very well. I'm enjoying the Two Doctors. I hope you are. I know it divides people. But I was very, very happy to see Patrick Troughton back because he was my favorite. It didn't actually occur to me, the whole Time Lord thing, riding roughshod over what we knew of Doctor Who, but it now seems a very odd decision for a story, that for a series that was so fastidious about throwbacks to the past. It then makes a major howler. And I know, you can now go, oh yeah, well, because he's got grey hair, it's season 6B, it's set after the War Games. Yeah, that sort of gymnastics I'm not sure should be required if you're doing something that is just for people that don't go into it in that much detail, but remember the general sort of timelines of the show. I think these things shouldn't make, if you're looking back to the past, you shouldn't then make it more complicated and contradictory. Although I'm also sympathetic to Robert Holmes's thing of just going, I'll throw in whatever I want if it helps with the telling of the story. And I suppose you do need the Time Lords for this. So anyway, it is what it is. And it's season 6B. I as I say, I like this stuff between them. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that they start with the Second Doctor. It's quite brave to start without your leading man. And I do feel for Colin Baker because. Like in Revelation of the Daleks, where he arrives in the story an episode late, all the exciting things going on while he's walking towards the venue of the story. This is very much at the moment a Second Doctor story. Why do I keep saying Seventh Doctor when I mean second? Diplomatic. Patrick and Fraser Hines have a great report. Fraser Hines. There aren't many actors that you could cast 20 years after they've done it and them still, pass for the same age. I mean, Troughton's hair has gone grey, but Fraser Hines still has the youthful look. I love the economy of this. Nowadays you'd see the whole invasion force and all that sort of thing. This, we've got some excellent music. We've got an extra. He's called Fernand Monast. I think he's also one of the dancers in Black Orchid. Come in and say, Professor, and get shot. Bit of music. You see the hand and the weapon. You see Jamie. I think Runoff is quite generous. He sort of ambles off. But I love that whole sequence. I love the face-off between the Doctor and Dastari. I do get the impression of old friends. I do get the impression that the Doctor's wayward way of behaving is slightly at odds with the dignity of the scientist, and the scientist who also is quite affronted by the Time Lords. I buy that whole relationship, and I think they do it very well. But I love that. I love the Sontaran theme. I love I don't know, there's something, I love an extra running off on and saying something and a laser gun killing him, because it's all it's a confluence of the things you had at your disposal. Nowadays you can have laser beams flying around all over the place, but that was an effect that took some putting on, and so you didn't see many of them. So it was exciting just to see a laser beam. It was exciting to see glimpses of a Sontaran because, as I say, I'd not seen them up to this point. I'm thrilled by the whole invasion of the spaceship bit. It's exciting. But it is worth examining why, because something is old. This is old enough where the hero can have a knife, because you wouldn't do that nowadays. It's interesting, isn't it, how knives were seen as fairly low key forms of violence. You you could stab somebody, throw a knife in somebody's back, and that was less visceral somehow than shooting somebody, because people had knives, and now you go, not a chance, because knives are imitatable and actually terrifying. God, knife crime is so such a blight to our streets, and yet it was, people messed about with knives. I mean, my brother, we'd got a few knives lying around because my dad had picked them up on his travels, so old army knives and things like that. And my brothers used to play a game where they stood on the lawn and threw the knife at each other's foot. I'm not sure this was a game sanctioned by my parents, but we lived out in the countryside. You were sort of left to your own devices. And they played a game where and one of my brothers did actually spear the other brother in the foot. But that was just seen as sort of childhood hijinks. But this is a fairly gruesome story. But yes, we're the idea of the past. I was so beguiled by the past because at this point I had no access to videos of old stories. Your purity could well become insufferable. I think that's an excellent line, and it's one I want to sometimes say to people who preach on Twitter. Jacqueline Pearce was a replacement for Elizabeth Spriggs, who plays Tabby in Paradise Towers, who was an estimable actress, a fine Shakespearean actress, but I can't imagine her as Jacini at all. She's a fine actress. She would have been a very different Jacini. But I think what Jacqueline Pearce has, she has that sort of forlorn sexual longing that she, I certainly buy her as because the androgyms are creatures of, visceral instinct and satisfying of sort of lusty pleasures. But she's been augmented beyond that. But that underlying sort of animal sort of magnetism, that she has a sort of longing about her that's quite sort of forlorn and melancholy, that I think really works. And there is a bit, I think I wasn't over the moon about her being in this simply because she reminded me of Servalan, and I'd seen load of Blake Seven, so I didn't need Doctor Who to have Blake Seven in it for it to be special or to impress my mates or whatever. I was so conscious of impressing my friends, but actually I think she's terrific in this, and I think she's terrific in Blake Seven. She has a wonderful sensuality about her, and I'm desperately trying to imagine Elizabeth Spriggs playing the part, and I'm not sure I can. Would have been very, very different. And I believe that Jacqueline Pearce was going to be saddled with Elizabeth Spriggs's wig, but then that got lost on the way to Spain, so then she was allowed different hair. So that was a happy accident for her, unless she actually found it I think it was lost on the flight, but unless she hid it. The Doctor's still not really in the story. Oh, I suppose he is. I suppose at least they've got the psychic connection bit where he's felt. Anyway, I'm trying to talk about the past. For me, anything that had a connection with old Doctor Who was somehow better, because that was a golden age. And I think it's just because it wasn't reachable. And I felt that anything that might, as I say, if I thought that this had 2 seconds of an actual Troughton story in it, that would automatically have made it. I remember the reason I liked Earthshock was because it had clips from 3 old stories in it. Actually, Earthshock on its own is an absolutely splendid story, and it's nothing to do with that flashback sequence. But when I was making lists in my head as a kid, Earthshock was the best of that season because it had got bits from old Doctor Who in it. What a self-loathing! The stuff that's present to me can't be as good as the stuff that was around before I was born. What a self-loathing way of behaving towards the show, and that was pretty much how I behaved towards the show throughout my lifetime with it, watching it and enjoying it, but always with an aching sense that I'd somehow missed out on what had gone before. It shows that looking back can sometimes be, well, it is, isn't it? It's very dangerous. All those people who sort of look back at the past as a sort of golden age and reject anything from the present are largely very unhappy people, and also wrong. There never was a golden age, Mike. I'm glad I've learnt that lesson now. The lighting here is lovely. I think this is this is effective. This dead space station stuff. I think that scene with Jamie and Shockeye could have done with that corridor maybe being a bit scored with laser blasts or something, because it did look like it was sort of almost separate from the ransacked space station, which really needed to look like it had been absolutely knackered. There should have been perhaps a fire if you did that now, you'd have hanging cables, you'd have exposed flames and all of that sort of thing. It just looked like it was slightly separate. We'll never quite get to the bottom of why Jamie turns into a growling beast. I don't know what that says about. That's a comment on Dear Fraser Hines. So if we leave you alone for more than a couple of weeks, mate, you're going to go feral. See, you need. Yeah, this suggestion of all this, destruction, I think you sort of needed in that scene of Jamie in the corridor. But this is nice, exploring, after the battle. Ooh, bloodstained. Yeah, that's very grim. And I've got to, of course, think of what Matt's not a fan, you see, so I wonder if he'll identify different things, because I know he's had to watch this specially. So I doubt he went in with particular things. But he might be much more general than I would be inclined to be. He might just say Patrick Troughton, do you know what I mean? He might say something about Nicola Bryant, because Matt is many things, an intelligent, funny, charming man who's also quite unreconstructed. That's the end of episode 1. This, of course, is an old-fashioned 6-parter. It threatened the Time Lords. The computer voice is Lawrence Payne. I think if I'd been Nicholas Fawcett, I'd have been a bit upset that I wasn't chosen to do the computer voice, because obviously you're getting an actor that you're already paying for, that you don't have to credit for another part. And Lawrence Payne's already got plenty to do. Or Tim Rainham, who plays Val. But anyway, I think Lawrence Payne is an excellent computer voice, and you're getting more out of one of your star actors. But when another Doctor Who magazine I remember very well is the one that had the episode guide from this, and I was very cross with it because in the credits it had the Doctor, then Perry, and then Patrick Troughton got third billing. I was like, I hope he didn't get that in the episode. I hadn't remembered, of course, because I don't like the idea of a companion ever getting credited before the Doctor, or the idea that the second Doctor might be guest cast, but he wasn't. He gets second billing in this, and rightly so. But the episode guide in Doctor Who magazine broke the episodes up into... It showed what the episode endings were for, I think, the American market, or certainly some sections of the international market where they were still being broadcast as 25 minutes. So obviously these extra long episodes had episode endings imposed upon them. And the first one for the two Doctors is when the computer goes, "It threatened the Time Lords," which, although it's a sort of incidental part of this, it's a bluff that the Doctor... it is fed in order to distract from the nefarious plans of the actual enemies. It has a bit of Time Lord conspiracy theory as window dressing throughout the story, because Robert Holmes liked having a go at the Time Lords as well. I bet that's Matt's favourite bit, where the Doctor picks up Perry. It wouldn't surprise me. But so I think that's quite an effective episode ending. As we will discover, they might not all be quite so effective. Now, this was enough to get Peter Moffat lambasted by fandom, in that the Sontaran removing his mask is in long shot. It's not even in long shot. It sort of cuts away, and because he doesn't fully get his mask off in the long shot. And the idea that a good director always has the monster remove his mask in close up, which is of course so prescriptive that that doesn't have to be the only way that you do it. But it was enough to be a sort of byword for Peter Moffat is a bad director, because instead of showing off the really expensive fancy location, he should show off the monster mask, because that is what Doctor Who traditionally does. I don't think you necessarily have to, although I am surprised that we didn't get some form of establishment of the Sontaran close up at any point. But I don't think, when we first get to the Hacienda, that is the time to linger on Are they the worst Sontaran masks? I think they might be. I think the Sontarans are actually creatures that in classic Doctor Who started with their very, very best design and costume and gradually got worse. I don't know. I may reconsider, because I do recall Stike having quite mobile features, but certainly I think the collars on these ones are really duff, and I think Lynx is one of the best monster design and realizations in the Time Warrior in the whole of Who. But I remember finding them a bit clattery. I think those collars need to be secure, and they're not. But it's difficult because I haven't quite seen the Sontaran yet, because Peter Moffat was filming where the money had been spent, which was on the Hacienda. Do we care that it's set in Spain? I know it's a great thing for BBC productions, but I always think the BBC was always slightly more, because they'd always do. I remember Only Fools and Horses, didn't they go to Florida for a Christmas special? I think they were always slightly more impressed than I was as a viewer. But geography has never been my thing, so full disclosure. But it didn't bother me if it was set in Spain or if it was set in, West W1 or, Denham. Did that wasn't the lure for me at all. The lure for me was Sontarans and Patrick Troughton, but that's because I'm a nostalgist. Perhaps the past. That's my geography. Another country, i.e. the past. But perhaps for other people, I'd be interested to hear if the fact that it was in Spain actually made any difference to people watching at the time. But it didn't really particularly bother me. It didn't strike me as being a particularly different setting. Do you know what I mean? To anywhere else that had lots of film work. Just outside film work was enough to make some Doctor Who seem different. And I remember particularly Lanzarote. The fact that Lanzarote and Planet of Fire is Lanzarote and Sarn just seemed to me a bit too obvious. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to Planet of Fire. All this sort of stuff about the Time Lords being bad guys and the Doctor sort of believing it might be possible but hoping it isn't adds to sort of a nice layer of sort of conspiracy to it. And the idea that the Time Lords might be up to no good, I think is quite a nice cynical backdrop for Doctor Who. Robert Holmes is very good at sort of broadening things out so that they have repercussions to worlds that we don't see. And he's got and I love a lot of his dialogue, that he dispenses little bits of texture so very cleverly. I also think there's some dialogue in this some of the bantery dialogue I'm not wild about, but the sort of as the Calgesic worn off and all those our races have grown tired and defeat our seed is thin. There's a lot of bits like that I like, and I'm sure you could augment an earwig to the point where it understood nuclear physics, but would still be a very stupid thing to do. He writes some nice stuff for Troughton. And Troughton does that stuff so well. It's that slight sense of desperation that he has about it, sort of childish desperation that he has, that is so good. But Colin Baker was very much my Doctor. Although I struggled with the present, I'd not liked Peter Davison, who I love now, one of my favourite Doctors. He wasn't Tom Baker, who had been my Doctor. So when Colin Baker came and wasn't Peter Davison, I was a great fan, and I liked his testiness, and I think he's got an edge to him as a Doctor, and I think. Obviously the work he's done for Big Finish is so good, because I actually liked the costume at the time. I'm now not such a fan. I think it smacks a little bit of desperation, and it looks like a costume. I think you could have the same. Well, because it's in such good nick as well. Because it's at a time when, it looks like a BBC Light Ent production in places. And when the Doctor is the one that's screaming Light Ent, I think you are in a bit of trouble. And that's just about the look and the pristine nature of that costume. If it had been perhaps a bit dirtied up and broken down, and and sort of so melded into the background just a little bit. But as I say, I liked it at the time. Amy Delamain, she's very convincingly Spanish. She played old ladies all the time, didn't she? She was one of those people who played old ladies forever. She imagines her being born an old lady. Gosh, I bet she was. I'm sure she was probably born in the previous century, was she? Or maybe not. No, maybe not. But I think in the brief couple of lines she's got, I wonder if they consider Patsy Smart, the ghoul from Talons of Weng Chiang, for this part as well, because I suspect there was just a handful of old ladies who cat fought for the various old lady parts going. But I think you are English. Yeah, I like the way she does her brief little bit, and of course he has to kill her, and she has to die without making an old lady do a stunt fall, and I think that's done pretty well. I remember watching this with some friends. They went, "What? Was that you killed her like that?" She's like, "Well, you can't chuck her against a wall. She's an old lady." And I like the little bits of sort of butchery, paralysis stuff that Shockeye dispenses upon the animals, i.e., the humans. And I'm assuming they're gonna. Oh, they don't cut away for a while. But I like the whole thing of John Stratton's body language, the way he wipes his hand on his protruding stomach. Jay Androgum. Jay McGrath as Dead Androgum. Now I'm remembering this. Fernand Monast as scientist. Haven't looked any of this up. This is in my head. Dead Androgum on your. I think Jay McGrath was an extra in other stuff as well. But that's a few of the sort of walk-on actors were credited in that episode guide, and they have stayed in my head. I don't know much else about Jay McGrath, but I hope he was happy then, and if he's still alive now, he's happy now. Fernand Monast, I did have to look up something, because I think somebody was trying to identify some of the extras from Black Orchid, I think. And I think he was in an episode of Dempsey and Makepeace or something that I tracked down, and he'd got a couple of lines in that he gets a credit in. I think it might have been Dempsey and Makepeace, in order to help somebody identify him, and I can't remember why it was now, because this happens to me. I get messages from people going, "Do you know anything about these actors / extras?" Because I'm trying to identify who is who with something. I'm the unpaid actors advisor of the Doctor Who universe. And it distracts me from doing the sort of work I should do to earn a living, but I do quite like it when I get sent a challenge to go, "Do you know what happened to this guy?" And sometimes I know, and sometimes I've got a little bit of a head start, and sometimes I don't know, but have a bash, and quite enjoy it. I like the archaeology, but I particularly like finding out about the people, partially because I'm envious of anybody that's spent a time on set in an episode of Doctor Who. It's interesting because I do like the Spanish setting now. It does give it a different feel, and I think Peter Moffat gets a lot of stick, but I know he went ahead of schedule, and so some scenes that were originally set inside are set outside, and of course if they're set outside, the scenes do look so much better, and they get a little bit of an extra edge, and I like these two guys hanging around in Spain. I love these guest characters. And the Androgum's interesting though, and I wonder because Matt he alluded to the fact that he teaches people, doesn't he, about cultural differences and things like that. I wonder how he will take the idea that the Androgums are predisposed to only be creatures of lust and pleasure, and that the idea you might augment one with superior intelligence is a bad thing. How do we take that? Obviously, in a show like Doctor Who, having an alien race that has a particular quality is what defines them as an alien race. The Sontarans are warlike, and that helps to tell the story and perhaps satirize a particular element of humanity, because the aliens are a distillation of that particular thing you wish to examine about ourselves. But it does mean, therefore, that alien races aren't as diverse as, say, there are some warlike humans, but not all because they're from one country, for example. There are lustful humans, but not because they're all from one country. It's a trait that goes through a personality type rather than a racial or a species type. So I'm interested how we feel about. I don't mind, because I like the fact that the androgams are a vessel with which to examine the idea of gluttony, and to turn the tables on us and find us the foodstuff of desire, and for the way that Shockeye talks about us as livestock, I think is a witty joke. Although this does have its livestock and eats it, in terms of it's a story about how disgusting gluttony is, that also is that also is pretty gruesome in its execution. Yes, it extols the virtues of vegetarianism whilst reveling in meaty murder. And I know a couple of very smart, clever writer people who think this is a terrible script, which is interesting, because I've always had a soft spot for it. I've always liked it. I will, I'm not going to struggle to find things that I like about the Two Doctors, and yet I can completely understand anybody that has a problem with it. There's absolutely no need for all this guff with the Doctor and Perry in yet another variation of the ventilation stuff. We're waiting for the main characters to get involved in the story. As I've said, it is slightly hypocritical in that it's a call to arms for vegetarianism that revels in its own excesses, and it does have a few tonally questionable things that we will talk about when we get to them. I don't want to anticipate one. I'm in two minds about one of them. I'm in absolutely one condemnatory mind about the other. And yet, I find the action of this quite enjoyable. I find the grotesqueness of it quite enjoyable. I like the sort of black comedy of it, and actually, I found as a youth, because Doctor Who was starting to be seen as sort of a bit cheap and a bit quaint, when Doctor Who was to echo a phrase that was soon to be used about it by one of its bosses, violent and unimaginative, that the violence to me was grown up. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That violence was seen as grown up, but it combated the low budget for me. It combated the fact that you couldn't have stuff that you had in more adult things. So when it was sort of quite grim and people died, and particularly if they bled or exploded, that to me was, this was the stuff. I adore Oscar and Anita. I adore Anita. I mean, I would run away with Anita. I love her accent. Didn't she say of the Dona Joanna, she is old and has white hair? I think Carmen Gomez is very winning, and I love James Saxon, who was pretty much my age, I think, when he died, not long after the DVD of this came out. Now, this is a scene, the one between Shockeye and Val, that was supposed to be done indoors. I love the way sort of he's almost got the shakes. Look at how he shakes with sort of sensual pleasure, but he's obviously riddled with all sorts of diseases, Shockeye. And I love the way he sort of spits out the watermelon and calls it insipid filth. And watermelons are slightly disappointing and full of pips. They do have a beautiful underlying flavour. I don't think they're the best designed of things, but I love. I just adore what John Stratton does with Shockeye. I totally buy him as both a butcher, but also as somebody who appreciates food, but also is a glutton with food. fancies himself as a gourmand, but is actually a pig. And I think that there is that's the fine line, isn't it, between somebody who appreciates food and somebody who's just greedy. And I think he captures all of that whilst being a sort of believable alien rogue. I'm enjoying John Stratton more and more as I talk about him. And I love James Saxon. That's what I think I wanted to, it only sort of slightly hit me that Oscar was as an actor. I was so young, bear in mind I was 10, 11 when this was on. So I probably noticed at the time, but then I sort of forgotten as it was broadcast and it became a memory. And when it came back again, it was clearer to me that that Oscar's an actor, and he is the sort of he's very much how actors are played on television by actors. Even though I'm not sure I know any actors that are totally like him, or do I? But I do adore Oscar because he allows Robert Holmes to give him some brilliant lines. And is that in this episode where have I just been talking through it, where he says, "Oh, I love these moths." She says, "Well, why do you kill them then?" Which I think is but again that captures that the contradiction between somebody who appreciates things but also destroys them and treats them very, very badly. And of course, he's really largely there to provide the means for one of the questionable things that happens later. But I'm not going to get ahead of myself now. As we're getting to the end of this episode, where this is Jamie's house, yeah, Fraser, this is what you'll do when you when you've just been left with nobody to talk to. You'll somehow throw away your kilt and dress as a garage mechanic who starts dribbling and forgets how to talk. And of course Perry gets ravished, and Colin always does that sort of getting knocked unconscious sort of acting and all the sort of sci-fi stuff. He always does that very well. And Fraser's wrapping himself around Nicola Bryant there. So that's the end of episode 1 of The Two Doctors. I love that. I mean, I don't think it treats. Amy Delamain gets 4th. That's very interesting. Because that's the only place she'll fit because of the other pairings. Yeah. It struggles again to fit the Doctor and Perry in. They are sort of slowly getting to the story. John Walker, excellent film cameraman. He had a good time with Doctor Who because he was the film cameraman on City of Death as well, and he was a film camera assistant on Abominable Snowmen. So he got to go to all the foreign locations: Spain, France, and Wales. Tony Burrow. His brother was an actor called John Darrell, who I worked with. But Tony Burrow is an Oscar-nominated designer. Designed quite a lot of sets, Doctor, in the 80s, and is interviewed in the... I'm just going to pause that. Interviewed in the 20th anniversary Radio Times special, but has not contributed to the DVD or Blu-ray range, which I think is something it would be nice to readdress, because he got an Oscar nomination for Ian McKellen's Richard III, and a very good set designer. Anyway, this is all the sort of stuff to be saying when the episode is on. Now, I think I told Matt to choose 2 things about each episode, and then a bonus at the end. So I've got to choose 2 favourite things about episode 1 of The Two Doctors. Well, the first, I think he's not going to choose this. I'm sure he's going to say something about, he's going to like Perry's top or something. He's going to try and rile me with something unreconstructed, Matt. I may be doing him a disservice, and he may come across as an absolute gentleman, but scratch the surface. I Sontaran attack. I like, and I think if he does any of these things, I'll take it. I like that sequence from the technician getting zapped, the economy of that, the scientist rushing in, and the zap of the laser beam, but particularly I think that that Sontaran theme, dum 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 dum, which is militaristic, but it's also dramatic. I just like that. I like the attack on the base, which, and again, with a modern day Doctor Who budget, you'd have loads of explosions. You'd have the ships coming in a big old model shot, and you'd have various people getting slain, and probably more aliens and all that sort of thing. But it's told with great economy. It's done under. It's done how you did Doctor Who then, and I still think it's really dramatic and exciting. Although I think Fraser should run slightly faster. That's all. That's because you could say sort of go, I can't run too fast because the set's going to come to an end. And I think I've got to choose. And I don't think coming into this I was going to choose this, but maybe not at this stage. But I think John Stratton is so good. So the whole sort of concept of the androgams and as their sole representative, because Jacqueline Pearce is technologically augmented, and I just think the way that he plays it as a sort of slightly sort of scabrous pirate. It's like he's got, it's like he's sort of got scurvy, and he's that sort of slight shake that he has, and the way that he uses his hands. And I even like the way he sort of flourishes his knife when they go into the kitchen, and the roars that he gives. I think John Stratton is glorious, and I think all of the cast are glorious. And I know I have to avoid the temptation of just picking out the guest cast because I know things about them and blah, 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 blah. But I think everything that John Stratton embodies Shockeye, in terms of how important it is to the story because of what the androgams are. I think he nails them as a species and as their sole sort of full representative. I think he does sterling work, and it's a glorious performance of the type you can only get in Doctor Who. So I do like the face-off between Troughton and Lawrence Payne as well, Dastari. I do like that back and forth that they have. But I'll go for Sontaran Attack. It's like incidental music, all of that, and John Stratton as Shockeye as my two favourite things of episode 1. What has my dear friend Matt Hayden chosen?
So I hope you enjoyed episode 1. Oh goodness, it's getting warm in here. I think someone must be putting the heating up. It really is getting warm. I won't go as far as I hoped Perry would go when I was 19. In episode 1, so many things to pick from, but I particularly like the fact that they dive straight in with the second Doctor. No explanation, just go straight in with him. I do wonder whether that might have been some confusing for some younger viewers, but I love the boldness of just going with that. And the other choice was, I love actors doing a bit of business, and I love Colin Baker's business with the Gumblejack. Although, is that a Gumblejack? I'm not quite clear. I think he's failed to catch a Gumblejack, hasn't he? But you can tell me that. And Jamie's nifty little act with his scheme do. I think actors enjoy doing a bit of business, and those two chaps do a terrific job. So those are my two choices for episode 1 of The Two Doctors.
I like that. Now he called James. Was that James Knight? Because I know that as a Dirk, which is in his. It's in his sock, isn't it? And I'm sure it's in the novelisation of Tomb of the Cybermen or one of those that I was very impressed that Jamie had a knife sequestered about his person because he could wield that in times of peril. I like the idea that the companion could act of his own accord. He called it a scheme do, did he, Matt? I'm going to look that up later. I'll learn something. I picked I enjoyed Colin's business with the fish, and I do think you're right. I think it's not a gumblejack. He was aiming for a gumblejack, or maybe it's a small gumblejack. But I thought that was nifty, and I had I thought about it, I might have chosen with going for opening with Troughton, but I felt that was perhaps me of the past, because yes, of course you open with the old stuff, the old people, because they're the best. But actually, I love Colin Baker as well. So I think perhaps the older Wisebeaker as well. I actually think it's probably it's at the incumbent doctor's expense, and I'm not sure if that's wise. Interestingly, in retrospect, I wonder if actually the current doctor should take the lead, especially in a season where there are other stories where he is ill served. So maybe that prevented me from choosing the fact that it opens and the first 10 minutes are with the old doctor, who I absolutely adore and can't get enough of, and I love all those scenes with him and his rapport with Jamie, which has picked up where they left off. I love those two together. So perhaps that's what stopped me choosing it, but I'm certainly happy as a viewer without these mental gymnastics that we do to go to watch it and enjoy. I love the first 15 minutes of the story that are Troughton and Jamie on colour adventures together. So yeah, good choices both, but neither of them, both things I highlighted, but neither things I actually chose, although I will get points if Matt chooses the Sontaran theme and or Shock Eye for later episodes, because that's how it works, I think. Yeah. So anyway, thanks to Matt. Thanks to you for listening. I'm gonna turn off all the lights and activate the security system that for some reason is in my ventilation shaft, should anybody be crawling about in there. Or, in fact, any of my friends that I haven't spoken to for a couple of weeks have gone feral and turned into savage ventilation shaft dwelling beasts. Thank you so much for coming to this happy time and place at Hadoke Towers, and I do hope you can join me again sometime soon. But in the meantime, do take care of yourself, and goodbye. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest this time around, Matt Hayden. He's on Twitter at Matt Hayden, Matt with 2 T's, Matt Hayden 65. Follow him there if you like. I'm grateful to patrons who include Matt Sawyer, Keith Say, Len Stewart, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Nick Temple, Sabrina Tirabassi, Reynard Toombs, Apollo C. Vermouth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Rich Wiggins, Michael Williams, Andrew Willis, Stephen White, Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, Peter Harness, Rob Lennart, Stephen Moffat, Richard Straw, and Jenny at Blue Box 99. The music for this podcast is by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you too would like to be a patron, go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. There are several tiers available, but they start from £3 a month. You can get a 10% discount. You can get a 10% discount if you pronounce words correctly. You can get a 10% discount if you... Should I keep that in? Yeah, I don't think anyone listens to this bit. See, the professional in me wants to go, start again, Toby. But then the professional in me would be being employed by somebody rather than being a hopeful freelancer blatantly asking for you to chuck money into his hat, which means perhaps I should have higher standards than... I shouldn't work out my problems in front of you, should I? Go to my Patreon page. There's a discount if you sign up for a year. And with a year's continued employment, I might get the editing scissors out more frequently. Or you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke, which is literally me with my cap in hand, asking for enough change for a cup of tea. I know it's called Kofi, as in coffee. You buy me a coffee. But if you did give me money for a hot drink, I would more often than not buy a tea. I have about 2 cappuccinos a year in real life. Sometimes I just get a hankering for one, but don't really drink coffee since I swallowed a lot of Pro Plus and drank a lot of black coffee doing my dissertation at university many, many years ago. And I think ever since my stomach has gone, I've had quite enough of that, thank you. But what you would be doing at Ko-fi is getting me something metaphorical. So what am I talking? I've lost track. So have you. Nobody listens to these bits. So there we go. Actually, I say that. I'm deliberately protesting too much because I've had some people say, "Oh, we like it when you do that bit at the end." But I suspect for the 2 that have said that, everyone else has either switched off in disgust or not even got this far. So well done for your perseverance. I think if you listen to this much, you don't have to give me any money. It's the because that doesn't work because the other people haven't heard that. Anyway, this is what this is. This is the pluggage for the patronage bits, which is what has to be done these days. I'm grateful to you just for listening, but there is a caveat to that. I mean, I am grateful to you just for listening because it's nice to know that people are listening, but quid pro quo, and if you're not in the mood for quidding, as evidenced if you've decided not to do the Patreon or the coffee thing, which is perfectly acceptable, but metaphorical quidding, invisible quidding, no quids involved apart from the Latin quid of the pro and the quo, which is you can go to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and give these 5 stars. That helps. The more 5 stars I get, the more visible I am, the more I go up the rankings, the more I go up the visibility when people search for Doctor Who podcasts. And there's a lot out there. So 5-star reviews and perhaps a couple of lines saying nice things really just helps make my algorithms all warm and comfy, which is what they really need at this time of year. Thank you for that. I'll shut up now, which I know I should have done several days ago. Operate the defence.